Shalom, shalom, Caroline. How are you today?
All right. How are you doing, Avi?
Getting ready for the next lockdown.
Well, we're already sort of in a lockdown, aren't we? I mean, it's been going on for a week already, right? So,
Yeah, we are, and I moved my home studio back to the office 2 weeks ago, and now back at home.
yeah, well, thank God for having to go to the garbage can. It gives you someplace to go.
And to walk the dogs. You're one of the little ones.
To walk the dog. I mean, it just.
Uh,
Let's talk
well,
about that later. Let's move on to happy news, and then we can talk about the lockdowns in Israel. What do you think of that?
I think that's a great idea. You were just a witness to these historic Abraham Accords. You were there on the White House lawn. Love to hear your thoughts, Carol. How was it?
Well, I had a lot of different thoughts there. Some of them I wrote in Israel Hayom, some of them I didn't. Like, for instance, one of the things that I thought was really cool, that is definitely not worthy of a place in the newspaper, was that we were sitting on the South Lawn and looking at the White House portico. That's where they were standing, and I could imagine Abraham Lincoln standing there. There are famous pictures of Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War standing at the White House portico, same building, and I just thought that that was so cool that there was the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, standing where Abraham Lincoln stood. And I don't know, Abraham Lincoln was a childhood hero of mine, and still today, I must admit. And it gave me, what can I say? It was very, very cool. So that was being at the White House and being there. You get like these little tingles when you realize where you are and how extraordinarily lucky I was to be there. So that was the unpublishable stuff, just because it's silly. But
Was that your first trip to the White House?
It wasn't my first trip to the White House, but it was certainly my first peace treaty signing ceremony at the White House. Right? I mean, that it was. I mean, I was at the White House a couple of times during the Bush administration, and then there was a long absence of 8 years where, guess what? Nobody wanted to talk to me.
Obama didn't invite you, Carolyn, for 8 years.
May sound, I was never invited to give a briefing to Samantha Power or whatever. So, and then I've been there a couple of times, since Trump. But of course, my travel schedule has been impacted negatively by two things. One, obviously, is the coronavirus, but the other thing is the fact that I'm raising kids. So, they keep you at home. Having said that, there were a lot of really notable things about that ceremony. And I think one of them was, and I wrote about this in Israel Hayom, was the stunning contrast between what was happening there on September 15th, 2020, and what happened there on September 13th, 1993. On September 13th, 1993, you had Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin and Bill Clinton standing there and shaking their hands with Rabin's, forced handshake or whatever with Arafat, with Clinton standing behind them, pushing together. And, you look at that. I remember I was at home. I was living in Tel Aviv at the time. I was in the Army. And I had gotten a sneak peek at the Declaration of Principles, the framework agreement that they had, that they signed there. Actually, they didn't sign it. Arafat never signed any agreements. He insisted that Nabil Shath, his chief negotiator, sign it. He didn't sign it. Nabil Shath signed it along with Shimon Peres. He didn't sign anything, by the way, which is notable. But that was the whole point, is that it was all a lie from the very beginning. And I had gotten this early copy of the Declaration of Principles when it was still supposedly top secret, and because they wanted me to translate it into Hebrew. And it was terrible. It was a terrible agreement. I mean, it had more holes in it than Swiss cheese, is what the chief of staff of the army at the time, Ehud Barak, said about it. It was a terrible agreement. It was, I had taken a few courses in international law when I was in college, and I had just graduated from college a year and a half earlier or 2 years before the signing ceremony. So I still remembered it all. And I thought to myself that if I had handed in the Declaration of Principles as a final paper to my international law seminar, I would have gotten an F. It was an absolutely terrible agreement. It covered none of Israel's interests. It gave everything away to the PLO, which is a terrorist organization. It was all, based on a dream that, oh, if we give them stuff, then they'll be nice to us. It's appeasement. It was appeasement.
Right.
Just the Munich Accord was an appeasement of Hitler, which of course didn't work. The Oslo Agreement was an appeasement of Arafat, which is, and he's like Hitler. He's a mass murderer who seeks the genocide of Jewry. In his case, and we gave them guns, and we gave them legitimacy, and we gave them territory, and they used all of it and money, and they used it all to kill us. And 20 years ago, by the way, this week was the beginning of the Palestinian terrorist war that killed 1,600 Israelis. And, it's all like coming together. So it's like this full circle. So it was 27 years ago that you had this really horrible thing happen on the White House lawn, a strategic calamity of epic proportions, that Israel was bamboozled because of the wishful thinking of some old men who shouldn't have been in politics anymore into accepting of a terrorist organization, the architect of global terrorism.
You were cut off for a second. What did you say? Into accepting?
Into embracing this global terrorist organization. The PLO trained Khomeini's revolutionary guards in their camps in Beirut in the 1970s. Imad Mughniya, who was the terror master of Iran and of Hezbollah, was trained by Arafat's 417 in Beirut. That's where he got his start. After 9/11, bin Laden praised Arafat as like his guide in the world of terrorism, because these were the pioneered international airline hijacking, and here was Israel, their primary victim, saying, "Oh, well, we're going to make peace with you now." So you take that lie that happened, that was in the Rose Garden. So in a different place. In a way, it would have been nice if they had done this ceremony in the Rose Garden too, just to stick the finger directly in the eye. But and then you had 27 years later this other signing ceremony, where notable in their actions were the Palestinians, because 27 years later they still haven't recognized Israel's right to exist. They still incite and encourage and support terrorism. They weren't there because the whole thing was a lie. 27 years of this crap, and they couldn't even show up at a signing ceremony for a peace treaty with the Arabs. And in fact, they wanted to condemn the UAE and Bahrain for signing on to peace with Israel. And that was a thing, that the Bahraini foreign minister, the UAE foreign minister who were there, they were really interested in peace. I mean, they're talking. It's not. People say it's not a peace agreement, it's a normalization agreement, but that's really the point, isn't it? I mean, normalization is peace.
Right.
The whole reason why the Jordanian peace agreement and the Egyptian peace agreement, and of course the lie with the PLO, have all been such failures, or are so clearly failures, used from the outset to implement the normalization clauses, which meant that they were going to have normal relations with Israel. Here, they don't. They just set aside the whole crap about peace because it's totally worthless, and all they're talking about is normalization because they want real relations with Israel.
Right.
They're gonna. We made a mistake during the Obama administration, thinking, well, if we don't have the Americans because they're betraying us, we should go to bed with the Chinese, and we signed a deal having them build a port in Haifa, which of course the Americans freaked out about because it's a terrible idea. And now who are we building it with? We're building it with Dubai Ports World. It's a UAE port construction and management company, and it's going to be a joint deal between an Israeli firm and Dubai Ports. And what's interesting is that about, 10, 15 years ago, the Dubai Ports World, when they were still in the terror business, wanted to build or operate one of the ports in Northern California, I think in San Francisco or Oakland. And it was a big hullabaloo because of their ties to terrorism. And there's been such a transformation, thanks mainly to the radicalization of American foreign policy by Obama, that the UAE suddenly they're out of the jihad business completely. You know, they're pro-Israel, and they I lost you for a second.
I'm here. I just had to tell my son something, so I took myself off camera. I'm still here.
Okay. No, they want to have close ties with us. They are building close ties with open ones. I mean, they think that we're the future. And by the way, they're right. But I mean, they totally changed their tune. And that was the other thing about the ceremony, is that you see that they're there. They don't have to be there. I mean, but I kept asking the American who I was seeing on the one, I was like, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? I mean, you know, all of the intelligence support that they need and cooperation that they need, they've been getting from Israel for the past, you know, more or less the last 6, 7, 8, 10 years.
Right.
You know, all of the coordination that they need for dealing with Iran, dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood, they're already getting. The Americans have already upgraded relations with them because of their informal ties with Israel. So what do they stand to benefit? Obviously, any trade that they want from us, we don't care if it's over the table or under the table that much. You know, we're money's money, you know,
Right.
and so why do they need this? What do they get out of it? And all of the Americans were saying to me, because it was a puzzle. I mean, it still is in a way. Why are they doing this? And it's because they truly believe that they're better off as open allies with Israel. They think from a commercial perspective and from a security perspective that they're better off. They get better stuff from the United States, whether it's fighter jets, which I don't know exactly where I come down on that, or it's a cooperation in 5G. You know, everybody wins in this agreement. The Americans win in this agreement, the Israelis win in this agreement, and the UAE and Bahrain and anybody else who comes along. And what's most notable about it is, you know, after Egypt signed the peace treaty with Israel in 1981, they were thrown out of the Arab League, largely at the behest of the PLO of Arafat. But generally speaking, the Arab world was really angry at Anwar Sadat for breaking ranks and signing a separate peace with Israel. He was kicked out, and this time the PLO came to the Arab League and said, "Oh, you know, here's a draft condemnation of the UAE and Bahrain for their agreements with Israel," and they were thrown out the door. The Arab League kicked them out, and the thing that is a testament. I mean, you can't say that Egypt in 1979 was less powerful than the UAE in 2000. It's just not true. And the reason that it happened is because the Arab world, or much of the Sunni Arab world, the ones who aren't revolutionary but anti-revolutionary regimes in the Sunni Arab world, want to have open ties with Israel. And I think it was really a sign that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu aren't exaggerating when they say that there are somewhere between 6 and 9 other states that want to join the bandwagon.
And we heard that another one is only within the next 24, 48 hours planning on signing a deal.
So there you go. You're better updated than I am. I mean, I saw the Kuwait one in 2003. I went to Kuwait when I was on my way to be en route to being embedded with the 3rd Infantry Division before the invasion of Iraq in Operation Iraqi Freedom. And the Kuwaitis found out, I guess through a Google search or whatever, that I was Israeli, even though I was traveling on my American passport. And they wanted to throw me out of the country. And they were so anti-Semitic and they were so evil. I remember I was there. It took 2 nights for me to get embedded. So the second night, the afternoon of the first day that I was there, this U.S. Army officer told me that he was led to understand that the Kuwaitis intended to deport me that night, and so I had a colleague, another Israeli, who was traveling under a Hungarian passport, and he was embedded with the 5th Corps, and he left that day. to join his unit. And so he just said, here, keep my hotel room. I have it for another night. And I moved into his hotel room and stayed there for the night, basically hiding from the Kuwaitis because they were so hostile to me as an Israeli that if I had stayed in my hotel room, there was a fairly large chance that they would have come in and escorted me to the airport and blocked me from joining the forces. So, you know, they were really wretched. And now, 17 years later, they're following the UAE and to a large degree the Saudis and moving towards Israel. And I mean, this is a really a huge transformation, and it's a testament to Netanyahu's understanding that peace comes through strength, and that the most important basis for peace is for Israel to be powerful, both economically and militarily. And it's working. So God willing, you know, it's going to continue. But one thing that I do believe is that this peace, as opposed to the fake peace that we signed on to 27 years ago, isn't going to lead to thousands of dead Jews. Worst comes to worst, we're out, but I don't see it.
Worst comes to worst, what?
Worst comes to worst if.
I didn't hear what you said. Worst comes to worst, what?
Worst comes to worst, like say for instance, God willing, you know, tomorrow the Iranian regime is toppled, and so that major threat disappears. So then the urgency of the ties may become diminished, and other things will come up, and they'll have other domestic challenges or what have you, and they'll decide that they don't want to actively cooperate with Israel anymore. Fine, you know, we weren't waiting for you, and we won't be waiting for you to move. You know, what your recognition and normalizing of your ties with us gives us is just more prestige, which makes it even more attractive to other countries. So, you know, go with God, as they say. I mean, it's not the same thing. You know, what I love so much is when all of these leftists in Israel start screaming about the F-35 sale that the Americans want to use the peace treaty as a justification for, and how dangerous and horrible it is for Israel's qualitative edge. They forget a couple of things. They forget that in exchange for that stupid, horrible, murderous handshake on the White House lawn, we gave them actual rifles that they shot our people with. You know, we gave them thousands of rifles. We supported their military training by the CIA and by the Europeans, and later by the U.S. military. We, with our own hands, transformed a terrorist organization into a terrorist army. And we gave them the means that they used to murder us. Right. So when people are screaming about the F-35s, let's get a little bit of proportion here, not to mention the fact that the Egyptians before them transformed their military from a Soviet platform-based military into an American platform-based military that is much more dangerous and powerful than the Egyptian military, the extremely powerful Egyptian military that we fought in 1973. And the same is true of the Jordanians. The Jordanians got squadrons of F-16s after they signed the peace deal with us. So everybody's squawking about the F-35s. You know, they want us to forget what they did to us.
On the one hand, they're saying it's not a real peace because it's a country we're never at war at. And on the other hand, they're saying, oh my God, but they're going to have F-35s. You can't have it both ways. What is it?
That really gets us to another aspect of this deal, which is so funny, which is the apoplectic response of the left to it, right? So it exposed the utter phoniness of the self-proclaimed peace camp. They're not for peace. They're for waging war against the Israeli right. The entire thing with the PLO wasn't about peace. And they knew it, and they certainly acknowledged it openly when they were pushing for the expulsion of 10,000 Jews from Gaza and from northern Samaria in 2005. They said it won't bring peace, but it's going to bring us victory over the religious Zionist community, and that's what we really care about. Because for them, they're so provincial and they're so power hungry that they don't understand anything about strategic reality. You know, they can't understand, and they refuse to accept the consequences the real life implication for real people being dead, right, of their terrible, terrible abuse of power and their terrible judgment. Because the only thing that really matters to them is how does this work? How does this benefit? Does this benefit or act to the detriment of our political opponents here in Israel? I mean, it's the same thing as the American left. They'll burn down America if they think that that'll give them the elections. And suddenly when they realize that it's not giving them the election, they're suddenly not talking about Black Lives Matter anymore. It's a terrorist organization that's killing cops. But, they were for it until they realized that it didn't poll well anymore. And here in Israel, it's the same concept, I mean, they were praising, they still do, which is insane. They still pretend that, and they think that somebody believes them, that Mahmoud Abbas, Arafat's heir, is a moderate. This is a guy that, hasn't changed one iota since he wrote his doctorate for the KGB university that he went to on Holocaust in Ireland, saying that that only 1.5 million Jews were killed and that it was all a plot of the Zionists that was concocted together with the Nazis. That's the same guy that we see today in 2020. And so they're still selling this lie. It's all they got. It's got nothing to do with peace. It only has to do with their hatred, their abject and total hatred of the Israeli right. And it's not even the right. It's any Israeli who doesn't look like them. It's any Israeli who doesn't act like them. It's any Israeli who doesn't, kowtow to all of their crap, whether it's, crazy lunatic social policies or educational policies that, have wreaked damage on our children's education, whether it's their crazy health policies, which we'll get into in a second, or their mendacious claims of being pro-peace when what they really are for is harming their domestic political opponents, and they're willing to empower terrorists to murder us if that gets their way. And recently, I think over the past year or so, or maybe 2 years, I haven't paid that much attention, but one of Israel's premier historians, who really I don't think he did that title, but Zev Sternal, he was a professor of history at Hebrew University, and he laid it all out on the line back in 2000 or 2001. He wrote this op-ed in Haaretz, which is the communal paper for them. They all sit around and read it together. And so he wrote this article where he was advising the Palestinians. This is right at the outset of all of the suicide bombings and roadside shootings and all the rest of it. And he said to them, if you want to gain legitimacy, why don't you just kill settlers? If you were to limit your killing to just the Jews who live over the 1949 armistice lines, and that would be fine. Your problem is that you're also killing Jews in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. That's not right, because that's us, and we like you, and it's making it very difficult for us to advocate on your behalf when you're killing us too. So why don't you just limit it? And and he never took it back, and he never apologized, because that's really what they think. And
right.
We're seeing it now with Corona.
Right. So I want to go back to a question regarding the UAE, strengthening a point you were making. People don't remember or might not even know. It was not the UAE. It was the Arab League. It was the Arab League that created the PLO in 1964 as its strategy to destroy Israel because conventional warfare wasn't working for them. Again, the Arab League. And then today, as you mentioned, it's the Arab League that rejected the request of PLO today, which is the Palestinian Authority, to condemn the normalization deal between Israel and the UAE. How significant is that irony?
I think that it's an earthquake. Again, it sort of goes back to what this deal is. This deal, is the Middle East. It's a new Middle East. I saw somebody wrote that it's the post-Palestine Middle East. There was it was actually an interesting article that I haven't finished yet, but I would urge other people to read it as well. It's an article in commentary that was written by a reformed jihadist who was Egyptian, and when he was a teenager, he was all in with Al Qaeda and all the rest of it, and now he's working in the United States for the Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism. And I don't remember what it's called. It might be called the Post-Palestine Middle East or something like that. And he said, and his thesis is very interesting. He said that in the Arab imagination, in the Arab world, just the word Palestine had sort of messianic power. That they didn't even have to think. It was like this buzzword. If you said Palestine, then everybody immediately knew, that this was the most important thing in the world. Whether they were Arab nationalists or jihadists, everybody was of the opinion that the most important thing, that the thing that would bring them redemption, and an end of days, is the annihilation of Israel and the annihilation of the Jews. And this really harkens back to a hadith which is quoted in Hamas's charter, which says that on the day of judgment, the stones and the trees will come and say to the Muslim, "Oh, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." Right? So that their concept of redemption, of a messianic era, is when they annihilate the Jews. And so the concept of Palestine was really about reaching a redemptive age, that all you have to do is annihilate the Jewish state, and then boom, the world will be immediately perfected under the of world Islamic government. So he said that this was, the reigning view of all of the Arab world, of the Islamic world, from at least 1948 through, 2000. I don't know when he would date it to. I would probably date it to 2011 with the start of the Arab Spring, when everything started to fall apart around. But and then suddenly people started to realize that actually this concept of Palestine and of annihilating Israel was doing the exact opposite. It wasn't bringing them towards a redemptive age. It was destroying their lives. It was making it impossible for them to develop their economies, to gain an education, to move forward in any productive way. And it was tying them to this fanaticism that was breeding the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood in places like Egypt and Algeria and Morocco, and on and on and on, and undermining the fabric of their society. And so there was this, we saw it actually, we saw it reflected also in the actions of the Arab Israelis, who suddenly started wanting for the first time to integrate into Israeli society around that time, and started joining the army in larger numbers. That kind of has been stopped because the Qataris started bringing in a lot of money, but that's a completely different story. And so now we have a fully irredentist and radicalized Arab political world in Israel, which hopefully will be changed in part as a result of these agreements. But the point is that the Arab world, the Muslim world, is abandoning not Palestine as a place, in the sense that there are people there or whatever, or we want them to have a state or we don't. Palestine was never that in their imagination. Even when the Arab League established the PLO in 1964, it was really Nasser, but he was the Arab League in 1964. Even when they did that, it wasn't really about. It was never about building a state. I mean, the charter of the PLO doesn't even talk about that. It talks about annihilating Israel and building an Arab state there. I mean, there was no concept of like Palestine. Palestine was like a catchphrase for the end of days when we destroy the Zionists, when we destroy the Jews. So when they started moving past that, it was essentially just a matter of time before you could get to the White House. I mean, you needed the right leaders. You needed Netanyahu in power here. You needed bin Zayed in charge in the UAE, and Mohammed bin Sultan in Saudi Arabia. You needed Sisi in Egypt, and so on and so forth. You needed those Arab leaders, and most importantly, you needed Donald Trump in the White House, because the other aspect of this deal that was really monumental, is that It was based upon an understanding, which I write about, by the way, if people want to read sort of an earlier analysis of this, it's all in my book, The Israeli Solution, that the idea of this myth or the centrality of the Palestinian as a key issue in the Middle East was debilitating for American Middle East policy for really since the 1970s. It debilitated their policy. Their policy was completely irrational because the whole time it was based upon a foundational view, assumption that was totally wrong. So, I write about it in my article that's going to be coming out tomorrow in Israel Ayom, that, they were willing to ignore everything that the PLO did. They were willing to give them a pass, get out of jail free card for all of their acts of murder and terrorism, even after 9/11, because the idea was that they were untouchable, that you couldn't actually demand that they pay a price for mass murder and for lying, because if you didn't have the PLO there, you'd never get peace. And so this was the idea that was at the base of American Middle East policy. It's the Rogers Plan in 1970. It's amazing. That's 50 years. And they were waiting for an iconoclast to come in and just tear this apart. Because the thing that Donald Trump did, and, I can say, well, I wrote a book about this before he came into office. Fine, but I'm not the president. I mean, I'm somebody who's been living this crap, right? I mean, I was in the talks in the 1990s with these terrorists, and then, and I've been writing about it since 2000 in the newspapers and stuff. But this guy is the president of the United States, and he assembled, a team of advisors who were willing, Jared Kushner, David Friedman, Jason Greenblatt, and others who were willing to just say, no, this is ridiculous. This is lunacy. You don't do this anymore. The PLO isn't that important. And by the way, they're terrorists. We can't be holding American Middle East policy captive to a bunch of people. And then the other thing that was so important was that Trump saw, as soon as he came into office, he saw that Netanyahu had been building this partnership with the UAE and the Saudis and Egypt to protect their core interests at a time when the Obama administration was threatening core interests, both through the nuclear deal with Iran and with its support for the Muslim Brotherhood in Hamas and in Egypt and beyond. And so Netanyahu had already developed this alliance with the Sunni Arabs in the Gulf and the Egyptians, and he said, "This is a great idea." He didn't say, what are they doing or not understand? Like, he immediately understood the strategic implications of what was happening, which is something that no other policymaker would do. I would dare say, well, maybe Ted Cruz would. I believe that Ted Cruz would if he had been elected president, but Jeb Bush would never have understood it. Yeah. Mitt Romney wouldn't have understood it. None of them would have understood it. But Trump came in and immediately got it, and that's why the first trip abroad that he took, first stop was in Riyadh, where he met with all of the Arabs and the leaders of the Organization of the Islamic Congress or whatever, it's conference, and he put together a counter-terrorism, a counter-jihadist, a counter-Islamist, and he was calling it that, Islamic terror in Riyadh. And they all signed up and they said, we're going to counter terrorism together, which was kind of like unbelievable, like really. But and then it worked out that they are doing it. And then directly from Riyadh, for the first time ever, flew, the first flight in history directly from Riyadh to Israel. And so it was like a sign, a very clear signal that America was going to take over this alliance. That rather than this being something that was done against the United States, it was going to be something that under Trump, the United States would lead. And this was, I think, the key moment very early in his presidency for Trump's foreign policy, because Trump he came in with a major challenge. Obama had just scuppered all of the entire alliance system that the United States had built in the Middle East and in other parts of the world, but in the Middle East first and foremost. He had betrayed Israel and he betrayed the Saudis, and he embraced America's worst enemies. He betrayed, he embraced Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood, right? Basically Al-Qaeda.
Yep.
And you had Daesh, you had ISIS that was, in charge of a massive amount of territory in Iraq and in Syria, and growing in influence throughout the Arab world. And so he had to figure out a way to rebuild America's reputation as an ally after Obama just told everybody, you can't trust us. Again, why did Israel sign a port deal with China? Because we couldn't trust Obama because he was betraying us every single day. So, Trump comes in and he says, okay, I have to rebuild my credibility. How do I do that? How do I make allies that were just betrayed for 8 years trust America again? And so it was a very powerful statement on his part that he went to Riyadh, the head of, the Arab Sunni world, together with Egypt, but Egypt is broke. So he went to Saudi, and then he went to Israel, because we're going to sell you lots of weapons to the Arabs. We're your ally. You can trust us. And by the way, cancel your 5G network deals with the Chinese. And so Americans were able, because of this, to rebuild their reputation and standing in the Middle East. They were able to kick, if not kick the Chinese out over time they have. I mean, the UAE said, as part of this deal, that they're canceling their 5G network deals with Huawei. And they're going to develop 5G capabilities with the United States. This is a monumental achievement for U.S. foreign policy. So the United States is gaining a very important advantage here for them, or keeping China away from these countries. And it's expanding, and it's rebuilt its credibility. Obviously, if Biden comes in, he's going to try to screw this, right? I mean, he's committed to reinstating America's signature to the nuclear deal with Iran, which just basically means I'm gonna cancel everything that Trump, and I'm gonna and I'm gonna side with Iran and enable them to get the bomb. But even if, God forbid, Trump loses and Biden and the communists come in and take over America, this alliance is going to become even more important for the UAE and for Israel, and it is going to become a military alliance. So I think, that you needed a president who was going to be willing to go against what everybody was saying. I mean, Bush said it, Clinton said it, Bush, the daddy, said it, Reagan said it. Everybody believed, wrongly, based on nothing except propaganda, that the Palestinians were the key to Middle East peace. And even people who denied it were stuck with it, like Rumsfeld, Bush's defense secretary for the first. He said he would go to Mubarak, over the years, back, dating back years. He would go to Mubarak, and Mubarak would say, oh, and you got to deal with the Palestinians. But that he was always like the first sentence out of his mouth, and it was sort of like clearing his throat. And that Roosevelt learned to discount that and not take it seriously, because it was just sort of this pro forma thing that he had to say. And he did it. But most people who were going and meeting, with Mubarak, or meeting with King Hussein, or meeting with whomever, they took it seriously because they don't understand anything about the Arabs, and they were willing to believe lies that people were saying just due to, the political realities that were on the ground at the time.
So let me ask you this. I read the agreements. They're actually very short agreements, both with the UAE and Bahrain. And surprisingly, I saw that there is no mention whatsoever of the price of Israel having to cancel or postpone sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. No mention of Israel having to work towards a two-state solution. Yet the media have been propping up, and even some U.S. administration officials have said, officially or unofficially, that the price Israel is paying is no sovereignty. What do we believe? Was it just being told to us because it was politically expedient? Or according to your understanding, was that really part of the deal? Is sovereignty really the price we're paying in order to make these deals?
So I think that there are two things here. One is that, yes, it just shows what peace looks like. A peace deal isn't supposed to be 150 pages long with annexes and notes and notes for the record and agreed memorandums and all of the rest of it. A peace deal is supposed to be like, okay, we're at peace. Because it's supposed to be sort of, and in this case it's supposed to be an afterthought. You don't make peace with people who want to kill you. You make peace with people after they no longer want to kill you. And that's why the deal is a reflection of stability that had already occurred, a stabilization of relations and a flowering of relations. All this does is formalize something that already existed. And that's why it's something that you can have confidence in. So I think that first of all is important. This is what a peace deal is. It just says, yeah, we're at peace now. Yeah, let's sign some deals. Let's make some money. Come on over. We'll kosher our kitchens in our hotels in Abu Dhabi, and you guys can come here for the new year or whatever. That's what peace looks like. And so that's the first deal. Now, regarding the sovereignty, I don't know. The U.S. officials that I've spoken to insist to me, that this does not kill sovereignty, that it was just postponed for now to get over this block, sort of like the Mubarak clearing his throat kind of thing. When any senior American officials came to talk to Palestinian state, okay, can we, let's get on to the things that I care about. Right. So that may very well be the case. I hope it's the case, but that also means a couple of things for Israel, right? One of the things that it means is that Israel has to start acting like we are the sovereign. And that means that we do have to approve building schemes in the Israeli communities in Judea and Samaria in a significant way. But we have to start policing Palestinian illegal building in strategic areas in Area C and taking it down. Because, like, for instance, we see it here in Efrat, right? They're building very, in a very calculated way outside of the northern entrance to Efrat that is a sort of a narrow road that links the northern area, the northern exit for the northern neighborhoods in Efrat, which are growing, and they're the larger neighborhoods in Efrat, to Highway 60, which takes them to Jerusalem. So what they're doing is they're building around the road. They're building adjacent to the road to prevent it from being expanded. And this road has to be expanded to 4 lanes over time so that you can enable morning and evening traffic, because that's sort of the thing that you need to be able to do in order to then expand a community. Because if you don't have transportation, then how can you double the size of the number of houses in your neighborhood or in Givat Eitam, in the Eitam Hill that we want to develop, which is a large area that has a good potential for expanding Efrat and so on and so forth. So what they're doing is they're building on choke points to try to block development, and that has to be taken care of. And that's happening. I mean, we know this intimately because we live here and we see it. But it's happening all over Judea and Samaria. And so these are the kinds of things that Israel has to take care of. And while we're waiting for the moment when we can actually do it, so that in our case as well, the application of sovereignty in these areas, in accordance to the Trump vision of peace, should be an afterthought when it's done. And so I think that the way to look at it now is to do it on the ground in a practical way, so that when we actually do it in a formal way, it won't seem like a very big deal.
Got it. All right, that sounds good. And the other thing I just wanted to ask, last question regarding the UAE deal, you being at the White House for the signing, and then going on to the other issue. Dr. Mordechai Kedar told me something, gave me a great quote. He said, foreign policy in the Middle East is like sand dunes. It all goes according to the wind. Things change. You're talking about not democracies, but individual rulers that could be changed overnight. Then policy changes overnight. And the other thing that came to my mind is then remembering Israel's 2 first allies in the Middle East were Iran and Turkey, and yet look where they are today. So how would you tell people to have a perspective of this peace deal, whether just for today or moving forward in the future, taking all that into consideration as well?
I have no idea, which is why it was so important that we didn't pay anything down, except, to delay sovereignty, because that's the big threat. to our security is this whole concept of land for peace, where we're paying up front for something that has an uncertain future, so that peace should be developed over time after the relations are formalized. They shouldn't be getting any payment up front for doing the minimal thing that's expected of human beings, which is to live at peace with one another. So I think he's absolutely right, which is again why, I wrote from the White House right after I left the White House. I said, look, this doesn't feel like a deal that's going to lead to Jewish victims. And in 1993, when we were watching it on TV, it definitely looked like a deal that was going to lead to Jewish victims. And we were right. The visceral feeling was strong in both cases.
Right. All right. No, fabulous insight. So let's go on today. We are about to go on to our second full lockdown starting tomorrow, and we're in a quasi-lockdown right now. Government's already telling us, or Prime Minister Netanyahu already said that the lockdown we're starting tomorrow is going to be harsher than the first lockdown. And many Israelis, and I've been talking about this, and you've been talking about this, have lost trust in government, in authorities, and telling us what to do, what not to do regarding Corona, because every night there are thousands of people out protesting out in the streets outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's house. And on the one hand, they're saying masks, no social gatherings, social distance, everyone, but then allowing thousands to protest every night. Trust has gone down. And here we're going into this new, harsher lockdown. And once again, even though there's been a big fight to, one, restrict prayer groups indoors and outdoors, they're finally...
I have a kid who needs me 1 second. Can we take a commercial break and we'll do this section in about like 3 minutes?
Go for it. I will just entertain in the meantime. I will sing and dance.
Right. I will be right back. Okay.
Folks, this is live, right? This is the world of live we're in. And I know some people have made comments. So let's go and see what your comments are. Right? This is a great time. Henry says, Boker Tov, Shalom, hello. Harry says, this woman should be prime minister. I agree. Henry, Bibi's big mistake, another lockdown. Oy vey. All right, well, we're about to talk about this whole issue right now, Henry, but we're going to be talking about the legal aspect. Isidore, lots of echo on Avi's side. I am really sorry about that. We actually did do a test beforehand, and we tried to solve it, so I'm sorry if you still have echo. We'll try to make a difference on the recording. Henry, again, leftists making terrible agreements, not possible. Well, except for the Iran nuclear agreements. Oh, heck, anything that the left touches, it screws up or destroys. 100%, Henry. Again, old men not in politics anymore. I represent that remark. News for Sheva that Sudan and Israel are signing normalization agreement. Thanks for adding that in, Henry. Solomon says, funny. Miss Frank, I want to get stuck on an island with Caroline for like a week and just listen to her brain. She's just full of knowledge and logical thinking. 100%, Miss Frank. I don't know what that is. Terry, you must read her book. She understands the underlying issues better than anyone I've heard or read. 100% read Caroline's book, The Real Solution. Barak, I agree. Great. Okay. Great. All right. I was just
learning things. They the internet connection goes down and suddenly there's no Hebrew class. So,
Right, all of a sudden there's no school. Right. I was just going through comments that people were making. Basically, everyone's saying you should become Prime Minister, Caroline. That's basically what all the comments are saying. Going back to, and I told them I agreed. But going back to the question. So basically, once again, we're going into this lockdown, and it seems like the government is being stopped but for putting restrictions on the public gatherings because they are still allowing protests against Bibi Netanyahu. And again, Attorney General's ruling. What is going on? What can you tell us what's going on about this, Caroline?
It's really funny. This whole thing reminds me of this sort of hilarious visit that I had. My parents came to visit me when I was in the Army, and I had just moved into a new apartment in Tel Aviv. And my parents arrived in Israel, and I'm showing them around my new apartment. And I'm proudly telling my dad, look, it was like a half floor up off the ground. And I said, but see, Dad, all of my windows have bars on them. so nobody can get in. You don't have to worry about me being so low to the ground in Tel Aviv because all of my windows have bars. So he walks around the apartment. It wasn't that big, and he goes into this sort of porch, enclosed porch off of my bedroom, and didn't have bars. And he said, "Well, you don't have bars on any of your windows, because if there's one room in your house that people can get into, then what's the point of having the bars everywhere else?" And I keep thinking about that sort of ironic exchange or whatever that I had with my father of blessed memory, 29 years ago or something, in relation to these demonstrations. Right? Because what they're doing is they're giving a carve out to leftists, right? They're saying you're not allowed to pray in synagogue. You can only pray, in groups of 10 or 20. And even that now is in question. You can't go sit you can't sit in an outdoor cafe. You can't go to your office and work in your cubicles or work in a factory that doesn't have, that you don't have the public coming into. It's not a place that, serves the public, like the forensic glass factory in the South. You can't go to any of those things. You have to be unemployed. You have to go into unpaid leave. Your kids can't go to school. Your kids can't play sports because you could die, because this is a disease that can be deadly, and it's spreading like wildfire throughout the country. We now have one of the highest infection rates in the world. We went from being the best country in the world for fighting COVID to being one of the worst. And the reason for that is because you have this one porch that's open. So they do a carve out. They say, and the funniest and the biggest lie is that they say nobody's getting infected at these anti-Bibi riots that they're having outside the prime minister's residence a couple of times a week, where massive support, wall-to-wall support of Israel's media that's sending these swooning reporters to cover them like they're some sort of folk heroes or something. They're all sort of enacting this fantasy that they get to be Antifa or Black Lives Matter people, just like the leftists in the United States that they so admire, right? And they're disgusting. And it's thousands of people who are coming and defecating on the street and standing together and cursing and whatever they're doing, and they're nuts, right? They're crazy people. When we're not allowed to have any guests over to our homes for Rosh Hashanah, last week they had a mass meal with 200 people outside of the prime minister's residence. These are just COVID-19 parties. They're all coming together and they're all infecting each other. And then we're told this lie, right? Oh, nobody's been infected at these riots. I mean, there's no one who was just diagnosed with the China virus. And I asked him yesterday, I said, well, how did you get it? Do you know how you got it? And he said, well, I had to pick up a book from a friend's house. And even though we were both wearing masks, we did talk for 20 minutes. And so my thinking is that he infected me because he's positive. So he's standing wearing a mask, talking to a friend, probably not that close together, and he gets infected. But you have 10,000 people on the street, many of them not wearing masks, no social distancing whatsoever, and nobody's getting COVID. So they're lying.
Just to interject, just this morning there was a news report that the head police officer in charge of the police forces at the protest outside Balfour today was diagnosed with corona, with the China virus.
Yeah, but he probably got it at the synagogue, because religious Jews get it, but secular leftists don't get it. So that's the problem, is that the minute that they have this carve out for these lunatics, and they have it, nobody else can take the regulation seriously, because even if they take them seriously, they feel discriminated against, right? And so, because they are being discriminated against. If the leftists get to go out and have corona parties all the time, then why can't you pray, in a prayer quorum? It's a totally ridiculous state of affairs. And, the person who's pushing, I mean, there are two forces in Israeli politics who are pushing this. And they're both doing because they have a political interest in doing so. The first is our legal fraternity, our totally politicized, nuts, totally corrupt Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit, who just came out with this new thing saying that, oh, well, during a time of total shutdown of the entire country, including all factories that are abiding by all the coronavirus restrictions, but we might as well put them out to work. So long as the entire country is shut down, then they can limit the number of participants at the Corona at the Prime Minister's office to 2,000. All right, people are going into Yom Kippur; they're not allowed to go to synagogue, and he's giving these lunatics up to 2,000 people to participate in their rallies. This is crazy. Why is he doing this? Oh, and he also said last week he made the stunning statement that the government isn't allowed to shut them down because the government has a conflict of interests. They can't shut down the protests because the protests are against the government, and therefore the government can't shut them down. This is insane, right? There's no law behind any of this. There's certainly no rational calculation behind this. This isn't crazy. What's the point of having a government? If you oppose the government, then the government isn't allowed to enforce the law towards you. You get immunity from law if you oppose the elected government. Where does that exist? Maybe, you know where it exists? I'll tell you where it exists. Nowhere. And so people say the Soviet Union, but that's not true. In the Soviet Union, the government, the only people who were allowed to demonstrate were people who supported the government. Right now, they're not allowed to protest. They're certainly not allowed to pray. The only people who are allowed out are people who oppose the government. And why is that? It's because the real government in Israel is our despotic legal fraternity that is accountable only to its members, and its supporters are on the left, because all of them are joined at the hip with a common venal lunatic, totally irrational hatred of Netanyahu. All of these protests are being funded by mega millionaires in Israel, and they're all on the left, and they hate Netanyahu and his supporters because they aren't, and we're different from them. We don't have their values. We're not progressive. We're not post-nationalists. We like our country. It's very similar, almost identical, in fact, eerily identical to the situation in the United States and the just sort of neurotic hatred of Trump and his supporters by the left and by former Republican elitists. It's the same concept. And so Avichai Mandelblit, the totally corrupt Attorney General who's behind the incredibly corrupt indictments of Netanyahu, the only thing that he cares about right now is getting Netanyahu. There were reports that were immediately hushed up about all of the cases that are lying, on the ground with nobody to pick them up and deal with them in the prosecution, because the only thing that they care about today in the prosecution is getting Netanyahu. Wow. And so, they're not taking care of enforcing the law against anybody, essentially. All they want to do is throw him out of office and put him in jail. And so they think, they did a new thing. They changed, they gave instructions, literally, like unbelievable, but they gave instructions to the police and to junior prosecutors of how to deal with legal unlawful behavior by the protesters. What they said, Norit Lichtman, I think Mandelblit's deputy, what about this guidance out of the clear blue sky, says that people at political protests shouldn't have the law enforced against them. That, if they, so that, for instance, the last week, one of the protesters sprayed pepper spray at a and injured him. And,
a police officer.
And he got out of jail and he was given 2 days home arrest. If you come back to Israel like I did, you have to be quarantined for 2 weeks. But if you assault a police officer in the middle of these left-wing protests, you get out of jail for free. All right. This is something that never happened in Israel. And the only good and this is why government can get Corona under control. Because nobody can believe that they should listen to the government when the government is just simply by allowing, it's not really the government, it's Mandelblit, is discriminating against the entire population of Israel on behalf of the radical left and these lunatics who are protesting outside the prime minister's house. And the reason why he's doing it is because this is his base of popular support for pushing forward with his totally corrupt indictments of Netanyahu that have no basis in law. So he needs them. They want to protest. And the only good thing about this is that from poll to poll, the right wing keeps going up. So if the right wing has 58 mandates today, which is 3 short of a majority in the Knesset, you're now polling 66. All right. So they keep going with these demonstrations. Unfortunately, hundreds more Israelis will be killed, just like they killed them with Oslo. Right. But at the same time, they're guaranteeing that they can say goodbye to national power for the next generation. It's just that this is a disaster because you see the results in the daily death counts from corona. You see the results in the daily infection rates of corona. I mean, you're getting now 10% of those who are being tested are testing positive. And this is when you're testing a tremendously, an ever increasing number of people for the disease. And what they're saying now in a fight at the height of the first wave, we had 64 people who were sick. Almost all of them were young people who got sick at a Purim party at the very beginning of the outbreak. So yesterday they said we've already gone past that. We're now at 72, and for the first time we have elderly people who have it. So that's dangerous, right? And that's just in our community of a fraud. And so, for me, it's like every single one of them. First, I blame China, but then I blame Mandelblit, because we had this under control in the last coalition government, in the whatever it's called, in the transitional government between elections. There you had the government that was capable of handling it, but here Mandelblit has taken over government policy. And I haven't even discussed blue and white because I think he's the dominant actor here. But, I was really struck last night when we were watching the news. The finance minister, Yaakov Katz, gets on.
Israel Katz.
Yisrael Katz comes on. And he's livid. He left the cabinet meeting in the middle to give this interview to the television. And he says something that's extraordinary. He says, look, I sat down with the economists in the Treasury Ministry and with the Minister of the Economy, Amir Peretz, who's a leftist, he's a former union boss, right? He's the former head of the Labor Party, or the head of the Labor Party, whatever. And so we put together a plan that was going to enable factories and high-tech firms that are able to abide by the standards of coronavirus restrictions to keep open during the lockdown, right? And they were assessing that this was anywhere between 30 and 50% of economic activity in Israel. You're not taking in customers. It's not a store. You don't have any contact with the public. It's just the same people going in, working the line every day, and that they're able to do it because they're abiding by all of the government restrictions, right? So that's maintaining in the private sector, which of course is the engine of the economy, 30 to 50% of the height of the economy open during a lockdown that people are assessing is going to last anywhere from a month to 6 weeks, right? He brings the plan to the government, and Gabi Ashkenazi, the foreign minister, and Benny Gantz, the defense minister and alternate prime minister or whatever, say, well, if the factories are going to be open, then we have to allow the demonstrations to be open. If you want to have people go to work, then you have to be able to have unlimited participation in these nights every week, in these corona parties. So the point is that there's no comparison between the two, right? I mean, you have factories, you have high-tech development labs that are all safe, that they've done everything they can and make them as staying at home, right? And yet you allow economic activity to continue in the country. But they're saying, if you do this, then you have to allow us to have our corona parties. And we're not going to allow people to go to work and continue to support their families if we can't burn down the country. And what does this happen? Like, what are they talking about? And then and how can they then come to the public and say, we're public servants, we care about you,
And Israel first. That was their campaign slogan. Israel first.
Power. When this is our position, people will starve if we don't get our chance to riot against Netanyahu. Everything we want is that. And we're willing to destroy what's left of the economy in order to maintain these crazy protests. And again, the only silver lining to it, because it's terrible, is, the day that these go on, they lose another seat in the Knesset to the right. Every day that this goes on, another 1,000 voters who voted for blue and white or for one of the other left-wing parties is joining Likud. And I truly believe that, because the public hates them. Leftists hate them. We're all scared of getting sick. We're sitting in our house looking at our kids and worrying every time somebody coughs. And they're saying we don't get it, we don't get infected. We don't infect anybody, like you said, the chief of police. But no, he didn't get infected. It's not our fault, right? And everybody's kowtowing to that. And in the meantime, you're not allowed to go to synagogue.
So let me ask you this, though, just following up. Yes, according to polls, the right wing now is 66 seats, but support for Likud has gone down. Most of the seats on the right have gone to
yes, with Bennett and Shaked, right? When they formed the new right party, and they asked me to take the 6th spot on their list, which was a safe spot according to the polls. The polls had us at 12 or 13 almost the entire time, and we didn't even cross the electoral threshold to get 4. Okay, so I love these polls that show that Naftali Bennett and his party, that has no members, is now polling 21 seats. But yeah, we'll see. I think what they show together, which is more important, is that together with Likud, they're at 50. All right, out of and you need a 61 seat majority, and with the ultra orthodox, they have 66. So I believe that when it happens. And in the meantime, I don't think that I don't take those polls seriously. If those polls were right, I would be a member of the governing coalition of the government now. I would be.
No, but I totally hear you. But the interesting point you're saying, again, even with the situation and the hasher, the approval that the Attorney General and Blue and White are giving for the protests, and more people are leaving, at least in the polls, the left-wing parties, still the media, the mainstream media that most Israelis watch and listen to, is placing the blame on Netanyahu, and support in the polls for Netanyahu is plummeting each time. He's also going down. You're saying, look at understand correctly, look at the general picture of the polls, which is a growing of the right wing. Forget about how many seats each one is getting, that Bibi is still getting support, even though it looks like he's losing.
Look, the majority of Israelis want him to remain prime minister. Or he's getting vastly more support among the public in lists of people who you'd want to have as prime minister than anybody else is. So the media now is pushing Naftali Bennett, my erstwhile colleague in the New Right Party, as Netanyahu's heir apparent, because they hate him. They hate Netanyahu, but it doesn't mean anything. These polls don't mean anything, and that's why the only thing that they mean, because the only thing they're clearly showing is an abandonment of the left by the public. That's the only thing that they're showing. The division of numbers, of how many mandates are going to be in each party. That's something that's determined much more by the campaign itself. The real move, it's like my sister said to me when I got pregnant with my second child. She said, the big shift isn't from 1 to 2; it's from 0 to 1. And the same idea. The big thing here is them moving from left to right.
Got it. All right. I know we both have kids to take care of in the home. Home studio, or school at home. Caroline, it's a pleasure as always, and stay safe and stay healthy with the family.
Thanks, you too, and have a Gmar Chatima Tova, have a safe fast and a meaningful fast, everybody watching us. And we should come back when we're no longer in lockdown and COVID is gone and next year in Jerusalem and all the rest.
And look at, yes, next year in Jerusalem, and hopefully next time or as soon as possible back in the Caroline Glick living room, dining room studio.
Take care.
Shalom. Thanks everyone for watching. Take care, everyone. Stay safe and stay healthy.